Today on Secular, our guest in studio, former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Secular. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Secular.
Welcome to Secular, folks. A special broadcast for you today as our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State, former CIA Director, former Member of Congress, Mike Pompeo, back here in our national studios with us on set. It's great to have him here.
Mike, I'm thrilled you're here. Of course, coming on the heels of a big election week. And I think we need to talk about that because we've talked about conservative leadership.
We're into weeks now.
Weeks. You're right. Yeah, this is like it's no longer election day. It's election month. Some surprising results. I mean, obviously we're still looking at things line up. I think the Republicans are going to get the House, but you've been in the House. It's going to be very close. The Senate, clearly not. What's the state of conservative leadership today? There seems to be almost a tale of two cities going on here.
Yeah, it was a disappointing election for sure. We had some good things. We got more votes in congressional races across the country cumulatively than the Democrats did. That's a 9-10 point swing. So it's not all bad news. But goodness gracious, with inflation running at close to 10%, open borders, all those things, we should well have been able to make the case to the American people that there was a need for change much more radical than what we're going to be able to get. And the message President Biden received, sadly, we all saw. He said nothing's going to change. And so conservative leaders, those of us who believe in our founding traditions, need to return to that. And it also, the last thing this reminds me of in this election is work. You have to go work. It's not enough to rail on Twitter. It's not enough to go on Fox News. You have to go out and actually communicate and listen. And I don't think enough of our candidates did that.
I want to actually talk about that when we get to the longer segment, next segment, about kind of what you see as the leadership or lack of leadership in some of these candidates. I think that just quickly, that we knew economy was number one, but I now that I'm talking to more and more folks, I realize, it was number one, but they didn't necessarily trust our guys.
Yeah, I think that's true. They didn't like what was going on, but they thought the risk on the other side might even be greater. And that didn't have to be, because the risk on the other side isn't greater. We know the right direction for the country, and I am hopeful we can continue to build on what happened, because when we do, good things will happen for the American people, not just the Republican Party.
You talk about leadership, and I think there's a leadership void right now. I think what Jordan just said, what you've just said, is emblematic of sort of a lack of, not satisfied where the country's direction is. I mean, Joe Biden's approval ratings are really low, but the lack of vision casting within the Republican Party and this looking back over the previous elections, I think we're actually hurting ourselves as this continues to happen, because number one, it depresses the vote. Number two, it's like the early voting thing. We have somehow got it in our head that this is a bad thing to do. It's like non-American. But if your state allows early voting, and I know we're going to get into this later, we need to take advantage of everything, because, frankly, they are building up a huge lead a month before the election actually happens. And a lot happens in that last month.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We have to look. My view is we should have a lot more same-day voting, a lot less pre-voting before Election Day. I think that makes more transparency, gives us more confidence. But to the extent those rules permit it, you got to get out there and work it. You have to go do the same kinds of things that the Democrat Party has demonstrated. Look at Pennsylvania. Close to half the vote was in the ballot box before that first debate. That's by the way, that's indecent, because the voters didn't have all the information they needed. Sure. But importantly, it's now impacted our ability to have control of the United States Senate as well.
Folks, again, we're going to spend almost a full hour broadcast today with Secretary Pompeo. We're going to talk through issues, both leadership, the domestic agenda, the international agenda. As you know, President Biden just having this first face-to-face with President Xi in China, what they did discuss and what they did not discuss, and also the broader foreign policy issues that are facing our country, economic issues, and then what it takes, what we need to do to win. That's ultimately how I want to close out the show today. Is what do we need to do to win, from the candidates on down? And I think we kind of said something is, while we could prefer same-day voting, like Secretary Pompeo said, we also have to, whatever's legal in the state, we should be doing everything we can that the law allows. And as always, go to aclj.org, support our work. That's aclj.org. After nearly 50 years, Roe versus Wade, the tragic ruling that manufactured a so-called right to abortion, has been overturned by the United States Supreme Court. This is the moment the ACLJ has been fighting for. It's the biggest victory we've achieved in our 3-decade-long fight against the soulless abortion industry. And believe me, abortionists like Planned Parenthood are devastated. This victory would not have been possible without the steadfast prayer and support of ACLJ members like you. On behalf of the entire ACLJ, I thank you for standing with us against the abortion industry and helping us save defenseless babies. This is a monumental win, but the war is far from over. The left is already scrambling to make abortion permanent in many states across the country. In California, for example, a bill just passed through another committee to allow for abortion up to 28 days after birth. It's truly the most evil bill we've ever seen. Extreme abortion advocates are not just going to give up, and neither are we. On behalf of the countless innocent souls that Roe versus Wade has taken over the last 50 years,
those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
That unborn child has human rights, human dignity, human worth, a life that deserves protection.
I thank you for making this victory possible, and I ask you for your continued prayer and support as we continue to battle against barbaric new abortion laws across our nation.
We now have a state-by-state fight. Your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference. Any amount you donate to the ACLJ this month, we get a matching gift, which means, as we've said before, if you donate $20, we get $40. You donate $100, we get $200. We encourage you to do it.
All right, welcome back to Secchio. We have a special broadcast today because our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, who joins our broadcast at least twice a week, is in studio with us. And, post-election, now dealing with a president who's had his first face-to-face with the Chinese leader and kind of what came out of that meeting. But we really wanted to talk about first, which is conservative leadership, not just breaking news, say, but we all know following the election, which are still the numbers being tabulated. I mean, we don't know while we're sitting here right now if we even got the House of Representatives.
In 1960, that John Kennedy beat Richard Nixon. In 2022, we cannot determine who is the governor of Arizona.
Yeah.
And who's got the House of majority in the House.
No. I mean, and it's kind of like a little bit of a no end in sight on the House side.
I mean, they say it could go on for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
The question is this. I mean, you got to be reflective, Mike, after situations like this. And you've been in a lot of leadership positions. You ran the CIA. You were Secretary of State, ran the State Department. You were a member of Congress. Let's talk about the Congress aspect of it. I do think there was this disconnect, we said earlier before the break, between the dislike and disapproval of Joe Biden's policies and leadership, but maybe a lack of vision casting among the Republicans. And candidates matter. And you see races like in Pennsylvania, where the governor candidate loses by 13 and then Oz loses by 3. You've got similar situations in other states. A lot of split ticket going on.
A lot of split ticket
which
voting.
is unusual normally in a midterm, but it's happened. What's your assessment of this?
Yeah. Boy, the data is still pretty murky, but my sense, having run for Congress 4 times, is that people are deeply skeptical of governmental institutions. I think that's appropriate in some ways, right? To be skeptical of government as a conservative who believes in limited government and freedom and individual rights. That seems right. That means the candidate's task is to go out and make the case so they get to know who you are, where your heart is, where your conviction is, the things that you will fight for, the things you'll really work on. And I think sometimes we just think, well, we can just go on conservative talk radio, or we can just put something up on Twitter or wherever it is, and boy, the message will get out there and it'll be received. That is fundamentally not the case in America. And so you have to get out there and remind them why that conservative value set is best for them and for their family and for their grandkids. If you do those things, and you can see candidates that did. Look at Zeldin in New York, right? Flips a place, not very conservative, by just going out and talking about the things that mattered to families in New York.
It probably picked up 4 or 5 houses.
Could easily be the majority maker.
Yeah, he could have been in the majority.
Yeah, by getting people excited about things they actually cared about and working it, like you said. I mean, that's that lesson for me, is that the star candidates, the social media candidates, you could be that, but you have to be some plus. There's got to be some there. And what we saw is the talking points weren't enough for people. They didn't trust, and I say us, I mean Republicans, with their pocketbooks. Even though they don't like where the direction of the country is, we were not able to get across with the candidate. That's the candidates. We're not able to get to their voters directly enough, in mass enough to say, no, trust us with these problems.
Yeah, I think that's precisely right. You have to articulate a real vision, the things you will do. Here are the 6 concrete things that I will do, right? I saw this in a handful of races. I was helping some school board folks. They said, here are the things we're going to do. We're going to hold a school board meeting. We're going to have the majority. Here's what we're going to do that'll make life better for you and for your kids in school. And when that happens, and only candidates can truly make that happen. When that happens, you get way past celebrity. You get way past this idea of personality, and you get to the things that really matter.
You know, this is something for political scientists to look at, but I do think this is interesting. If you look at the very local races, like the school board races, Republicans did very well.
Absolutely.
Some of them are, sometimes they run, it's not partisan, but, you know, the conservatives, I would say, did very well. That necessarily did not mean it transferred up to the governor, which is an interesting dynamic in some of these states. So what we've got, look, we're going to have it becomes presidential season, like, really next week.
Yeah,
I mean, here we go. Joe Biden, they say he's going to run again. Who knows? Assuming he is. What should the Republicans be doing right now? Because here's my let me first say a concern. And look, I've handled more investigations in the last 6 years of my life than any lawyer in the United States of America for a president. Okay, so I've done it. And there's a lot of calls for investigation, and I do think there's a role for oversight. But if all we're doing is oversight and we're not looking forward, I think we're going to make a big mistake.
2 thoughts. First, that is correct. Fine to do oversight, fine to investigate things that matter going forward. But we shouldn't investigate things for the purpose of correcting some egregious wrong that we think we're a victim on. I'm fine articulating that, but goodness gracious, the American people don't care about that. They want to know why what you're doing matters for me tomorrow. And so anything we do in oversight world has to be forward-looking with an eye towards how we're going to fix a problem set. The second thing is every Republican leader, every person who thinks, boy, I have the potential to be a national leader in the Republican Party, needs to be clearly focused on an articulation of America that we all know from our time when President Reagan, he was my commander-in-chief when I was a young lieutenant. Those central ideas are absolutely timeless. They don't change. We should not simply count on President Biden to run again, and we can just run against Joe Biden. Exactly. We tried to do that too many places. We cannot count on the incompetence of Joe Biden to help us win. We can count on him being incompetent. He has demonstrated that. But we can't count on that to convince the American people that we are worthy of their support.
You know, when you were in the Army under Ronald Reagan, I was working in Treasury when Ronald Reagan was the president. And we had just it was very clear what our job was. In my division, which was the trial division, it was fair enforcement of the code and depoliticizing. There was this concern that it had been, you know, this coming out of the Nixon a long time ago. It's coming out of the Nixon years.
Yeah.
This misuse of the IRS. We saw that happen again under President Obama. So it does, these kind of things surface. So that's worthy to get into. But my concern here is we have got to, as conservatives, cast a vision forward of what America should look like again. You know, it's easy to say, make America great again. It's a nice slogan. But the fact is, a majority of the people that voted for Senate didn't believe it, at least the way the election came out.
They didn't articulate. Think about it. This was, you had large numbers of Republican candidates talking about criminal justice reform, right? When in fact the American people wanted us to know just prosecute them fairly, non-politically, and then keep them away from my family
and my kids.
Kids.
Stop the fentanyl coming into the United
Stop the
States.
fentanyl coming in. Secure the border for a reason, because it matters to my family, because you have fentanyl coming to our communities and destroying families, and because you have terrorists coming across the border. Just get these things right. The basic blocking and tackling that frankly Reagan built upon are the things that I'm convinced we didn't have enough candidates. They were prepared to defend and articulate that vision.
Yeah, I mean, there's a role for Republicans now. We don't know about the House yet. And that will lead to that will lead to a lot of the oversight
but it's
decisions.
It's not going to be 235 seats Republican, which is what they were projecting.
No, it's not. That will lead to some of the oversight. But where do you see if you were leading those Republicans in the House, where would you encourage them to go when they're trying to figure out, can we get any legislation done with a Democrat Senate and a Democrat president, or do we just need to start really from scratch? Let's start articulating the big ideas on healthcare, education, the economy, inflation, the list goes on.
I think we should begin immediately to lay out our vision, but not just at the grand 90,000 foot level, not just, we're going to fix healthcare and we're going to stop.
Right.
We should put together actual legislation that says these are the 6 things that matter. And then, frankly, if you're in the House, you should pass it. You should demonstrate not only can you write it down, articulate it, defend it, but you can get the votes to make it happen if the American people will give us the space to go do that. Those are the kinds of concrete things that when I came in the class of 2010, 242, I think, by the time all the votes were counted. The big Tea Party wave. It was because we had articulated not just a contrast with Speaker Pelosi, right? Fire Pelosi, but we had articulated a vision for the things that we stood for and why it mattered that we were going to have the levers of power.
Well, you mentioned the Tea Party. I mean, as you know, we represented the Tea Party with all the IRS hassles. But the fact of the matter is, what the Tea Party did was galvanize a group of citizens around a core set of beliefs.
Yeah.
Basic conservative values, but articulated conservative values. And it appears to me that in this last go-round, we're just really looking back. There's just, listen, I get the people upset about the election in 2020, but, by goodness, folks, by the time the next election for president is, that's going to be 2024. It's going to be what happened 5 years ago. We got to be looking forward in all of this. Yeah. And I saw some of this in this time. This is, I think there was shenanigans going on. There's no evidence of shenanigans. You know what the evidence is? We didn't really do a good job of selling.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the evidence.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of losing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
I'm tired. I don't mean that selfishly. I mean for the American people, they deserve better, and we have better, and we should articulate why our ideas are superior. And when we do, I'm confident that we can then be tired of winning.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into that coming up. We've got a lot more to talk about coming up ahead.
That's right, folks. We're going to talk a little domestic policy. We're getting to China, foreign policy as well. So you want to share this with your friends and family. This is a special broadcast to have Secretary Pompeo for the full hour broadcast of Seculo following this election cycle, now leading it, as we talked about, leading into the next. And we're still trying to determine the outcome of the balance of power in Washington, D.C. We want you to share this with your friends and family. It's a special broadcast. You can learn a lot about a lot of different issues in this hour. And, of course, support the work of the ACLJ. That's at aclj.org. We have that matching challenge now, where you can double the impact of your donation. That's at aclj.org. Be right back.
In my time in service, both as the CI director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN, overseas with the European Court of Justice, is incredibly important.
We have on our team lawyers, non-lawyers as well, that are policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We have been focused on protecting the nation state of Israel, particularly before the United Nations.
We don't shy away from the battles that are going on at the UN and just complain about them. We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
The risk of an incomplete or unsolid relationship between the United States of America and Israel is real.
Israel is very important to the ACLJ, and we will always fight for Israel's rights.
We had a series of cases at the European Court of Human Rights, primarily dealing with religious liberty.
And as Secretary of State, I saw this too. Nations that had more religious freedom were on firmer footing. They had better democracies.
America has always been the world leader in religious liberties, in freedom of conscience and freedom of speech.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith and others that are having their rights abused.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to keep the battle going when it's not cool anymore, when it's not the number one story on TV. You have to actually be committed to fighting it out, or else you'll never win.
The ACLJ's front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
back to Secchio. This is a special broadcast to have Mike Pompeo on the set with us, our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, post-election, but also looking forward. We're forward-looking here at the ACLJ. We have to be. We've got current cases going on. We got work we got to do. We know the Biden administration, even in this time period between the election and the new members of Congress being sworn in, hoping that the House is taken by Republicans, they could be up to a lot of no good. So we want to talk a little about domestic policy that was on the top of people's minds when they went to vote. The number one issue was, of course, the economy. What is your concern, Secretary Pompeo, about the Biden agenda over the next 2 years when it comes to the economy? I get nervous that our Republican, very small majority, if they do take the House, will be really pressured into more of the handouts, more of the checks, and that seems to be like something people wanted, or they kind of voted on in this cycle. It's like, well, at least the Democrats will send me a check one day if things get too bad.
Well, I hope and I've seen this dynamic when you have small majorities in the House. There's an enormous amount of pressure on those in the center, those in less conservative districts, to go along with some of that big government spending. I hope they will come to see it's not in America's best interest, and they'll withstand that. The Republican Party doesn't have a great record on that, frankly. We spent too much money too. But on big things like the crazy so-called Inflation Reduction Act, we still are in a pandemic, according to the Biden administration. We still have a national health emergency. And those kind of things, I think anybody who rightfully calls himself a Republican or conservative has to stand up and resist that, and that they will do that not just for themselves or for their district, but for the American people. We're literally $31 trillion down. We have inflation running rampant. Mortgage rates are still in the sevens. I think the worst is still in front of us in the economy, and the temptation from the Biden administration will be to double down on spending to try and, quote, fix it, end of quote.
So assuming the Republicans take the House, at least you've got a block and tackle situation. I mean, you could at least stop some of this from going forward. But the American people are also going to expect some things to happen. And, the question is, does Joe Biden feel emboldened by this midterm election? And this is my view, and you may not share it, and it's fine. A lot of people might not share it. I think he feels emboldened. He did, in a midterm election, better than any president in recent history.
Oh, there's no doubt he feels emboldened, right? His gut reaction was, no, I'm not going to change a darn thing.
Nothing is.
And so he tried to give debt reduction for student loans. The courts have now thrown it out. It was clearly unconstitutional. There's going to be a lot of work for the ACLJ to do, because I assure you he's going to go use every possible nook and cranny he thinks he can hide in to do things that we know are illegal, unconstitutional, and I would argue immoral as well. So there'll be tons of work to do to stop him down from a litigation perspective. But the voices that need to be heard are those that not only set off against the things Biden presents, but to your point, are forward-looking and present over the next 10, 12 months a vision, so that the candidates who step forward in 2024 to run for these races know precisely where the party stands, know the things they believe in, are prepared and capable of articulating them.
What are you worried about with the lame duck session? You got these. Could they do away with the filibuster, codify Roe? I mean, I see a list of horribles, a parade of horribles, if you will. I don't know if they feel that they've got everybody on board to do that, but I would imagine coming out of where they feel like they did so much better than they were expected, that they may try to use that to push some pretty radical stuff.
They may. It's possible. Nothing good ever happens. I was there for 3 of them, I think. Yeah. Nothing good ever happens in these lame duck sessions. It's basically where people think in the dead of night and there's a debt ceiling vote coming up. Those things typically end up with the agreement to be that we'll all agree to spend more money on things that we don't need more money for. You mentioned the filibuster, too. I think it's important to think about. The Democrats have made pretty clear they're prepared to move down that path. That race in Georgia, the race to make sure that there is a Senator Walker and not a Senator Warnock, will matter to that next year as well. Think about if they have that 51st vote, then a mansion or a cinema won't matter nearly as much on important things like the filibuster. And so we have to go win that race, and we have to make sure that everybody that's showing up on January 3rd is prepared to unite around a common agenda moving forward, all 220 or 221 or however many we end up with.
Yeah. So you've got to look at, I think you've got this interim period, which is going to be significant. And then you've got, I think the secondary aspect is vision forward. And if, as I think, that Biden is going to be the president, is going to be very emboldened, He's going to try, like you said, he's going to try everything. We'll be prepared to meet those legal challenges. We've done it. I think some of these agencies are totally out of control, and I think that's going to get worse, not better, over the next 2 years. Now, the difference could be, that's where oversight can be helpful. The shenanigans and the whistleblowers coming forward are now going forward to a friendly audience with with Republicans, assuming Republicans get control of the House. So I think all that's valid. What domestic policies are the most significant looking forward ahead? What do you see as domestic policy?
So the things that we did well for our 4 years were we told ordinary families and small businesses, go forth, take risk, and be successful. We'll reward you. We rewarded people who worked and who were prepared to work. So think, the fancy word is deregulation. I always think about it as giving people space to go out and live their lives the way they want to. So I would start there. I would start with trying to slow down the bureaucracy from regulating, and Congress has the capability to do that. There are multiple tools. They should use every one of them to slow down the rulemaking processes inside these agencies. And then, too, there are big budget battles which set the course and the trajectory. Those budgets have to pass both houses, and you'll have the ability to deny them the ability to build out a budget that doesn't reflect conservative values as well. I'd put those as the top of the domestic agenda at the federal level.
One thing, too, we're watching, it's kind of, who is this conservative coalition now? I mean, I think that there's the MAGA world of the coalition, there's the moderate world of the coalition, and then where I think we've got to do a better job of bringing them in is a lot of suburban women. That again, we knew Roe was not going to be, the overturning of Roe was not going to help Republicans. I always say to people, if I could choose between a midterm election, though, and some losses there, and overturning Roe versus Wade in a midterm, I'll choose overturning Roe versus Wade, and then having that battle moving forward, because I think there's just a lot of education that needs to be done there. But we've got to bring them back in the next couple of years. We've got to bring back the suburban moms who I think are the chaos candidate, however you want to define it.
I call them chaos candidates. Are not selling.
Even when it's a tough economy, even if their party represents a better position on it, they just think, I can't even keep a lot of these folks on TV when my kids are in the room.
Yeah. I think those very people, the independents that we lost, and it looks like the data suggests we did pretty poorly there relative to where we have done before. Yeah. They're looking for seriousness and stability and a calm and an orderliness and a path. They're not looking for people who are the loudest voices and the people who are screaming with the most radical articulation of the vision. They're looking for folks who want to govern in a way that delivers to their family the very stability, so they can do the things they want to do. Go to Little League games, right? Cook the chili dinner at their church. All the things that these suburban moms do. Plan a vacation. All those things. These are the things that actually people care about, and candidates who are prepared to go put policies in place that deliver that will be successful.
All right, we're going to have another half hour with Secretary Pompeo, our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, against the foreign policy issues. I want to talk about China. I want to talk about Russia. I want to talk about Iran. I want to talk about Israel. I got a lot to want to talk about. So we're going to move to that agenda. But don't forget, supporting the work of the ACLJ, especially in the months of November and December, are really critical for us. This is how we determine our budgets for the year. We have some big initiatives next year. As Secretary Pompeo said, we've got a lot of work. And we know there's going to be a lot more work coming. So your support of the ACLJ and the matching challenge is incredibly important if you're able to. I know that's tough out there for a lot of people. And if you're not able to, we appreciate your prayers. If you're able to, whatever the amount is, we're getting a matching gift from other donors, so that doubles the impact. I encourage you to do that at aclj.org. That's aclj.org. Back with more in a moment.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Seculo. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Hey, welcome back to Seculo. It's great to have Secretary Pompeo on set with us here. Today is our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. You see him at least a couple times a week on the Seculo broadcast. But we discussed the election and kind of what we think we need to see moving forward. We also want to deal with some real-world items that are happening as we speak now. The President Biden, had his first face-to-face meeting with President Xi. We're just getting readouts from that meeting and kind of a full understanding of what was and what wasn't talked about in the meeting. And I want to play this soundbite. This was President Biden and get some reaction to it just following his meeting with President Xi. Take a listen, bite 8.
It was also clear that China and the United States should be able to work together where we can to solve global challenges that require every nation to do its part. We discussed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, reaffirmed our shared belief in the threat where the use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable, and I asked that Secretary Blinken travel to China to follow up on our discussions and continue keeping the lines of communication open between our two countries.
Okay. What they didn't talk about was COVID. Yeah. Which is, look, I'm going to say this, the havoc and the destruction from that virus has still ramifications. I mean, as all of you know, I lost a brother, my youngest brother, to COVID. It's, I think, destroyed kids in isolation. I think it's created all kinds of psychological issues for children and adults. And the one thing in the room that's there to talk about that is still impacting us today is the COVID situation, how it originated and what they're doing. Nothing. I mean, Mr. Secretary, inexplicable to me.
It's incomprehensible to me. I've listened to that press conference the president held a couple times, not a mention of COVID. Look, we know they unleashed a virus into the world that they knew was lethal and knew was highly contagious and killed millions of people as a direct result of having done that. They are responsible for it and should be held accountable. And the fact that our president met with him face to face while his whole staff was wearing masks still, if you saw the pictures from the meeting. So it is still there, is totally incomprehensible to me. It reminds me of Afghanistan. They just don't want to talk about it because they know they've mishandled it so badly. I heard the president's comment about things we can work on with the Chinese Communist Party. I don't get that. He acted as if this was an ally and a friend, and we had some minor disagreements. This is a communist party that is trying to undermine the way that we live here in the United States of America. While they sat there, the Chinese Communist Party was putting weapons on islands in the South Pacific and building coal-fired power plants. And we talked to them about climate change and how can't we all just get along? I think she probably saw this as a pretty weak leader in the United States, and I think we are in for some real challenges in these next couple of years.
And we also know that these kind of new authoritarians, we only got a couple minutes in this segment, we'll talk more about China when we come back, but these new authoritarians, Secretary Pompeo, they will point to the fact that the votes haven't all been counted, things like that.
Sure.
As saying, see, trust us, go with us, because you might not love everything we do, but we're stable. These guys over here in the United States, they can't even get their votes counted.
No, that's right. Can't count to 10. Black Lives Matter, right? They'll use all the internal instability and the chaos candidates that we put forward, and they'll put them on their TV stations, their broadcast networks, and say, "Trust us."
Yeah, I mean, it's very real.
Can I say something about the chaos candidates? Because I want to say this. That's where you lose the soccer moms. That's where you lose the middle. That's where you got people thinking, "I don't want the tumult." Policies may be fine. The tumult I don't need. And the thing is, when you're president or when you're in Congress or as a leader, you've got to, look. If we operated with chaos at the ACLJ, let me tell you what would get done. Nothing. Okay, we have to be. I always tell people this: you don't get emotionally involved. You've got to be clinical. How do I handle this case to get the result that the client needs that's the best interest for what the cause we're trying to serve? Like you said, Jordan, I will take the disappointments in this election cycle to see something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, which was the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which, as you know, I've been working on since before you were born. And we saw it. And an unbelievable opinion by a leader with one of the lead opinions that he utilized a case of ours. So it's very gratifying, but now we've got a huge education issue on the life issue. Gigantic. So all of this is really at play. But this is where your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference.
Yeah, donate to aclj.org. We'll be right back with Secretary Pompeo. For decades, the ACLJ has battled tirelessly toward the goal of seeing the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. As steadfast defenders of the innocent unborn, we celebrated this historic victory at the Supreme Court. But now it's time to put the hammer down and dig even deeper, because our war at the state level has begun, and we want you to know that we're fully engaged. The ACLJ just launched a nationwide campaign to defeat abortion in all 50 states. In order for this to happen, you need to know exactly what's going on where you live. So part of our campaign includes a layout of abortion laws in each state at the time the Roe v. Wade decision came down. You can find this at our website, aclj.org. And as you'll see, some states were prepared for Roe to fall and had already passed certain laws to protect the unborn. But others remain hostile to life and are moving to enshrine a right to abortion into their state constitution or state law. And this is exactly what we're prepared to take on. The breakdown of laws that we provided is a first step. When there's a fast-moving development regarding abortion, the ACLJ will be the first to know about it and will be ready. Right now, we're calling on states to enact robust protections for life and to vigorously oppose efforts to weaken those protections. This will not be easy, but neither was our last fight. And look how that turned out. When the ACLJ fights for life, we're always on the right side of history. We're in a matching challenge right now. That means all donations to the ACLJ will be matched, making your gift doubled. So go to aclj.org right now and join the fight. China. We've got Secretary Pompeo with us here on set, and we know because the president was just there with his first face-to-face meeting with President Xi. We've got the readouts. We know what they did and didn't discuss. I'm going to play a little more sound just to get the reaction from Secretary Pompeo. This was President Biden at his press conference following the meeting.
We're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly. And I want to make sure that every country abides by the international rules of the road. We discussed that.
Is there a major power that abides by less of the rules of the road than China, Secretary Pompeo?
Of all the things, President, it's not funny. It's very unfortunate. Of all the things he said in his press conference, that was the most disturbing. It shows a naivete of the most extraordinary levels. Not a single country has failed to abide by the international commitments they've made as much as the Chinese Communist Party has over the last 20 years. And when you hear the president say, "I'm not looking for conflict," she reads that as, "I'm looking to hide in my bubble, and you can what's the old Southwest Airlines line? He's feeling free to move about the cabin." And they've been at war. They've been at economic war with us for 40 years. This is a bipartisan failure of political leadership inside the United States. It's time to fix it. It doesn't sound like President Biden truly understands the real risk that ordinary families across our countries face. We talk about China as a foreign policy issue, but I think of it as things that matter to farmers in Kansas, things that matter to people who are trying to put gasoline in their vehicle, right? All these issues that emanate from abroad really impact families at home as well.
We've talked about it, and I think we were one of the first ones to really address it with your leadership, and that was this, what's going on the college campuses with these Chinese centers, what's going on in, areas in our states where they're buying property adjacent to nuclear power plants and getting away with it. And, we're starting now. I will say we're starting to see some progress here because we've been very aggressive. Yeah. Others have too. You've been speaking out. We've been taking legal action. I mean, there's things you can do. But China is an aggressive foe. I hate to say it.
They are. And you've got it exactly right. And you all have done great work at the ACLJ. They're inside the gates. Right? There was the biggest espionage operation I think ever conducted in America was from the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. Right. And we closed it. And the Trump administration, your point too, they're buying farmland near military facilities and nuclear power plants. If you want to ask about complying with the rules, I ask anyone on this show, try to call your real estate broker and buy some land in China today near a Chinese military facility.
See how that goes.
Well, you'll get a visit. You'll get a visit, or your family in China will get a visit. They are a rule breaker to think that they're going to abide by any norms and accept a conversation as a solution doesn't understand that they look for deeds and power, not for folks who want to just sit down and have a gab fest.
I'd like to move from the Far East to the Middle East and focus in a little bit on first Iran. But before we get to Iran, I want to say something. I was watching a documentary last night on Shimon Peres. It's very interesting. And this was shot before the Abraham Accords. Mm-hmm. But you could see in he was elderly at this point, but still very articulate. I've been with him a number of times, knew him pretty well. That here was a guy that saw what you all were able to implement, that we could actually see peace with the neighbors if you change things the way in which it was approached, which was always you've got to satisfy the Palestinian problem first, which, folks, we've been there a zillion times. We have an office in Jerusalem. This is a 68-year problem, okay? It's a business for the Palestinian leadership that's not going away. So you've got to work around it. So I want to talk about the Abraham Accords for a minute, because I think because it was near the end of the administration, it did not get the attention of the sea change that did in the Middle East.
I think it will prove to be incredibly durable as well. We're talking about vision forward. Right. I actually think it will prove forward-looking to be incredibly powerful. The idea was, look, we can find nations that are prepared to accept the basic idea of Israel's right to exist. Nothing fancy, right? Just this reality that we all knew to be true. And we were able to deliver that. And it'll be great for prosperity and peace in the region. I always think, too, it's good for Americans. The fact that you have more nations now accepting Israel's right to exist reduces the chance our kids will ever have to go fight and risk their lives there. So it seems like it's a long ways away, but man, it matters a lot. If your kid's a Marine or a sailor or a soldier someplace, the Abraham Accords have delivered a framework for peace in a region where there's been so much conflict and America has spent so much of its own blood and treasure.
I have done a lot of study of conflict in the Middle East. I've done 3 books on it. I studied it at the University of Oxford. I have read the papers. I read Shimon Peres' papers from the 1950s when he was negotiating for the nuclear developments for Israel with the French and the British. And it's always the same. Whenever the conflict started, it was always the same conflict starting. You have the Straits of Hormuz, Straits of Tehran, and the Suez Canal closed, which were built by the British, financed by the British and the French, and then war would start. And then the Israelis, because they were, I believe, because of both miraculous in the biblical context, but also militarily, were able to win. Now you've got this alliance that we've never seen before, where the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Saudis, they're not officially members of the Abraham Accord. I think if you would have been there another year, they would have been.
Sure.
This has really changed the way that, like you said, this impacts people at a real level here. But then they got this administration still trying to cut a deal with Iran. And by the time they cut it, if they do cut it, the deal will be over. I mean, this is absurd. A nuclear weaponized Iran will radically change the entire Middle East.
You know this very well, Jay. If were Iran to get a nuclear weapon, they won't be the last.
Nope.
Every power in that region will say, I want one too, creating enormous instability and can't blame them. Lots of risk. It does confound me, I must say. We had Iran as isolated as they had ever been. The world's largest state sponsor of terror was down to their last $4 billion in foreign exchange reserves. And these guys came in and stopped enforcing the sanctions and said, we'll sit down at the table with you, and have grown the Iranian economy this year faster than the American economy. If you can believe it, they'll have higher GDP growth in 22 than the United States. This not only puts the lives at risk of the Israeli people and Arabs, but the people who are protesting at home inside of Iran, the women who have been so brave, they're at even greater risk too. And this administration simply misunderstands how to create stability in the region.
They also don't even know recent history. And I say that because President Obama has publicly admitted he made a huge mistake during the Green Revolution, Jordan. You were very
in 2009
involved in getting those folks to stand down, basically. Yep. That was a gigantic mistake. It was the Jimmy Carter mistake with the Shah of Iran. I mean, it's the same thing.
See it again right now.
Yeah.
See it again right now. They ignore the protesters on the street. And it's not to say that the U.S. wants to take over those protests. And that's not the point. It's to stop empowering the bad actors. Don't bail them out with cash so that they have more weapons to shoot at protesters. Make them feel the pain economically. And we're talking about the leadership in Iran. So we've seen time and time again brave Iranians willing to take to the streets to protest. I wonder what we might see at even the World Cup which is it's interesting because Iran is in our group, is in the group of the United States. So yes, there'll be pressure on those players to almost militarize that game, but a lot of times those players oftentimes would like to defect after these kind of international events. So to me, it's just somewhat. I don't think we've understood and people fully understood what the Abraham Accords mean to the whole region of the world. They have put together this whole new fighting force against Iran, but also this new economic zone where Israelis are going to Dubai now, and people from Dubai are going to Israel to see their holy sites. So you've got tourism going back and forth, economics going back and forth.
How big is that?
It's huge.
You become friends.
You become friends. You know them. You exchange with them. You create wealth for each other. You make their families' lives better. It's even more good news, right? There's going to be direct flights from Tel Aviv to Doha, from Israel to Qatar during the World Cup.
Yep.
So all good stuff. It's continuing to grow and expand. It's going to be stable because it makes life better for the people of those regions. Who would have believed, Jay and Jordan, you tell me, 6 years ago, if I'd have sat down and said, Israeli planes and Emirati planes are going to be scrambled and they're going to fly in formation together. Right. I mean, this is the stunning nature of the Abraham Accords that we wouldn't have believed could have happened. And the good Lord and a lot of hard work and some amazing leaders, the Prime Minister, President Trump, amazing leaders made that happen.
And then you could still do that and still move the capital of our embassy to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem.
And no World War
And it would
III.
not.
I will never forget.
And I remember Kerry and all of them saying this would be the end.
I remember the night of the move, they had this event, and I get a call from the commander-in-chief, our commander-in-chief, and he said, well, because there was a little skirmish going on down by Gaza.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sure you got more than I got. You were the Secretary of State. He goes, can you get that stopped? But, in context, it actually was a very small reaction.
John Kerry said it was
It was going to blow the whole
fire.
Yeah, it's going to, and it was the exact opposite. I want to go back to some domestic policy issues when we come back from the break.
Yes.
So we've got, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back to, I want to talk about this abortion issue, folks. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there.
Yeah, and a lot of education that needs to be done over the next couple of years before we have more of these ballot initiatives and more legislative initiatives. So again, support the work of the ACLJ, aclj.org. Every issue that we've been talking about with Secretary Pompeo, we work on at the ACLJ. Our teams, whether it's our legal teams or our government affairs teams, all across the country and all across the world. If you can support our work, we have a matching challenge right now where you can double the impact of your donation at aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We'll be right back with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
The Freedom of Information Act allows people to petition their government and ask for the background information as to why they came to a certain decision.
It's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget.
We are entitled as citizens of the United States to know about how our government works.
Government agencies acting out of control.
They want to keep Americans in the dark. That's why it's incredibly important to have the ACLJ constantly pushing to find out what the background information is.
Do you remember the Iran deal? There was a video about what took place on that deal, and it was edited. And the edit took out the key part of what was going on. State Department, White House, editing videos to keep it from the American public.
We have exposed that in our FOIA litigation, and we do that every day that we bring these cases.
We took it to the IRS. No one ever does that. And because of it, it's a very weak government agency that used to be the scary government agency.
What the IRS was doing was violating the Constitution and statutory law. Because of the litigation we engaged in, it's a different agency. They can't do what they were doing before.
We've got the declassified list of Obama administration officials who started asking to unmask.
They've been hiding behind in the shadows. These FOIAs bring them to light.
And all of this information came because we went to court to get the information.
The power of Washington, D.C. only works when the rest of us, the rest of Americans, are kept in the dark.
We may find one item of information in thousands of documents of irrelevancies, but we persist and we're on it every day of our lives.
The work that the ACLJ does matters. It matters to policymakers. It matters to ordinary citizens all across America.
Those of you that support the ACLJ, this is what it's all about at the end of the day.
Think we haven't been on this, folks? We've been on it. So we had a long time to prepare for it. We saw unfortunately, a leak of a draft Supreme Court opinion that ended up being the majority opinion of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. The left, with their billions of dollars, was ready to go into the states with a lot of bad info, a lot of confusing info. I don't love using mis and disinformation, but what they did was to confuse voters. They wanted to confuse the voters who were voting on ballot initiatives. I mean, there's one in Montana that didn't pass. All it said was simply that if a child is born alive after a botched abortion, that we're going to provide medical care. It still didn't pass. People, because of the bad info that was put in place by the abortion industry, who outspin us but also outeducated a lot of conservatives. So we learned, okay, it's great to have these pro-life victories. We now need to, as we said, take that battle out of Washington, D.C., and take it to the states and take it to voters and really do a lot of education.
There's also this post-mortem, people saying, well, did the abortion issue cost the Republicans, more House seats? I want to get your assessment on that.
My sense is this: for those of us who believe in the right of every child to be born, what we can't do in the face of whatever the actual results or whatever the impact was, we can't walk away from this commitment. This isn't a political commitment. This is our understanding of human dignity and the right of every human being to be born. So we not only must continue to defend it, but to your point, Jordan, we've got to continue to explain it. When you talk with those who have a different view, they have no capacity to tell you precisely what rule it is they want in place. And so they have two things going for them. They have a ton of money because there is the abortion industrial complex that is alive and well and makes hundreds of millions of dollars, a big business all across America. And there are deeply vested interests that spend, to spend $6 or $8 million on an ad campaign in Montana is easy because you are a big economic winner from that. And then there are those who just simply don't understand the basics. And we have to articulate that. Different states are going to pick different points. Exactly. Not all of them are going to end up where Mike Pompeo would like them to end up.
Exactly.
But we have to go out and make the case in each place and protect as many of the unborn as we possibly can. And when we do, and we do it with joy, not anger, not fear mongering in our own way, but making the case and the argument for life, I'm convinced will prevail.
Here's what happened. By removing the club of Roe versus Wade, this, purported constitutional right that did not exist in the Constitution, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, not really there, okay? By removing that club of constitutional protection, it returns the issues to the state. But it did remove this club of saying, you're interfering with my constitutional right. The question then becomes, and I've been doing this for a long, long time, 4 decades of pro-life litigation. And the truth of the matter is, I remember in the early days, and they were in Kansas, actually, Operation Rescue, and the Summers of Mercy. That's right. And I was out in that courtroom for months litigating that all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Welcome to Wichita.
Well, I was in Wichita in the summer. It's pretty hot.
It's pretty hot in August of 91.
But my co-counsel in the case at the Supreme Court I was representing the private parties, and the Deputy Solicitor General of the United States was representing the United States on our side, and that happened to be John Roberts. And we were arguing that they couldn't apply this federal law to these blockades. But in one of the cases, Justice Scalia wrote that opposition to abortion was not discrimination against women. He actually said it's not class-based animus. There's no equal protection clause violation, which was the basis upon which Justice Alito wrote the first part of the opinion saying no constitutional right. So there's the constitutional issue taken to the side. Then what happens is this. Jordan and I have been on these calls because we've been helping a lot of state AGs and a lot of governors have been calling. And some of the stuff that's coming out, even from some of the pro-life groups, are like, okay, this is not going to move the ball forward. So what we've got to figure out is, how do we advance it? Like you said, it's not going to be every bill we like. But we had an informed consent case in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeal for Governor Noem. But of course, we won after Dobbs. My office was worrying about getting ready. We got to get ready for the oral argument. I said, if the leaked opinion's right, you don't have to worry about subsequent arguments. But the challenge is going to be, in this case, is the education part. And we can't lose hope in our fight for life because a few either go to a crazy extreme, no exception even for the life of the mother. Not the health, the life of. I mean, this is, the support for that is zero. I mean, it's next to zero. But we have candidates running on that. Again, it's a free country. You can think what you want to think. But we cannot lose sight of the importance of this issue, though.
No, we can't, because every one of these lives does matter, and everyone we can save is a good thing. It will take time. Roe did reset the conversation for sure. There were frankly conservatives who kind of, they would never say this, but the fact that Roe was out there, they could kind of throw up their hands and say, gosh, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. And I've heard a few of those in quiet conversations. The truth is, now's the hard work. This is where we began the show. This is the hard work of winning the argument and of presenting a vision for what this will look like. And it may take us 5 years, 10 years, another 20 years. It is entirely possible. But I'm convinced when you do that, when you articulate a vision, when you make the case, when you explain and listen, then you will ultimately get to the right outcome here. We know the right outcome is to save as many of these babies as we can. And we can't lose sight of the fact that it's not going to happen by screaming and hollering. It is going to happen by winning and making progress and building a consensus around what we know to be true.
Which, by the way, is when you've got a situation like this where you've had this major victory, there's the fallout from it you have to be calculated. I think some of the aspect was those that were pro-abortion were very prepared with an immediate media plan. And I think our side, there was some thinking this is never going to happen anyways, and then some thinking when it did happen, how does that affect their entities? I hate to say that, but I think it's true. Jordan and I have had that conversation. And then the other side, the lawyers, are saying, okay, how do we now advance this forward? How do we advance this forward? And that's where you've got to win the hearts and minds. And in winning the hearts and minds of the American people, you have to keep the issue in front. The medical science is the reason why I believe from 40 years ago we have seen this change in Roe versus Wade. I do believe, of course, it was God, it was a miracle, it was a lot of hard work by a lot of people, but the medical science, you could not argue that the child was not a child.
And you know this, because it's a child, as science continues to advance, that's only going to become even more clear.
Exactly.
Right? Whether that's the scans, the ultrasounds, all of this, the knowledge that this is a baby will become even clearer. But even the science has to be educated, right? Yes. That is, we have to educate on the science. And when we do, I always remind folks to, much better to do it with love in your heart, not anger and screaming, but rather with love in your heart for a shared set of sympathy around something we know to be so fundamental, the protection of every human life. When we do those things, we will make progress, we will prevail, and another 50 years from now, we will achieve the final objective of overturning Roe, is we will have a country that fundamentally understands that life does, in fact, begin at conception.
Just briefly, you've got a new book coming out in January. I know people can pre-order it now. Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love. If people go to MikePompeo.com, they can pre-order it. Is that the best place to go?
It tells the story of our 4 years. I turned it in before this election. I think everything I said in there still holds true.
I've done those books.
You can always do an epilogue.
I did learn one of your first jobs, Baskin Robbins.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
My daughter still asks me every day.
Assistant manager, exactly. Employee of the month twice. You can't beat it.
There you go. The start was at a Baskin Robbins. And who doesn't like Baskin Robbins? I'll find out. We'll find people will start posting. Okay, folks, that does it for today. It's great having Secretary Pompeo in the studio. But, your support of our work lets all of this happen. You see us, but there's a lot of people behind these glasses. There's a lot of people working our social media departments. We got lawyers deployed all over the world. That's because of your support of the ACLJ. And as we close this broadcast out, we want people to support the work.
Double the impact your donation. We have a matching challenge right now. So it's a great time to donate. ACLJ.org. We'll talk to you tomorrow.